She says, Father, many of my traditional Catholic friends are exploring Eastern Orthodoxy because they feel that it has preserved the liturgy and doctrine more faithfully than the post-Vatican II Church. How should we respond to these claims, especially when Orthodoxy seems to outwardly resemble pre-conciliar Catholicism more than modern Rome?
It's a good question, and there's actually a name that's kind of been given to this movement. It's called the Ortho-pro movement. There's sort of a presence online, and there's a lot of people. Many of them are from the Protestant groups or from the secular world, kind of gravitating toward the Orthodox Church. And in some way, there's more conversions in the Catholic world as well. But there's something particularly noteworthy, especially for young men, kind of gravitating that way. And a lot of times the liturgy comes up as an issue. So I understand the liturgical claim, like the outward kind of character of the liturgy. A lot of people have that impression of the antiquity. There's sort of like a sense of I'm in the first millennium when I'm present at an Eastern liturgy. But the question really, like doctrinally, it's not super accurate to say or think that they preserved the church's tradition, because there's been a schism there for a while. So it is, of course, Eastern Orthodoxy, the closest sort of branch of Christianity to the Catholic faith, but there is a schism. So the first primary thing to say is that there's a need for communion with the Catholic Church. And one of the things that happens is if you join an Eastern Orthodox group, all of a sudden, not only are you out of communion with the Catholic Church, but all those who the Catholics are in communion with. So we have 24 different ritual churches. We have groups from the Coptic world. We have groups from the Byzantine traditions, both in the Slavic world and in the Greek-speaking world, from all the way to India. And in general, the Eastern Orthodox groups that people would join when they're leaving the Catholic Church, they will not be the ones that, they won't tend to be in communion with a lot of the others. So you'll find that you're part of a sect that may be a bit narrower than you were thinking, even though there can be kind of a general claim, well, this is Orthodoxy. What I found is a lot of people are out of communion with everyone else, and it's hard to even find your bearings, like what group would I even join? So the nature of schism is that it tends to fracture things, and that's something you find when you ask the question about someone, going to one of those groups. So another thing is that the liturgical and doctrinal approach that the Orthodox have exists pretty substantially in the Eastern Catholic churches. There are some main differences, being that we have a lack of schism. We're in communion with the Pope and the Catholic Church. We're Catholics. And then there are certain non-negotiable doctrinal issues where the Orthodox would allow divorce and remarriage, and we wouldn't, make an exception because of the teaching on indissolubility. It's something that's not flexible doctrinally. So there are, a few issues there, but in general, there's a ton of overlap with the Orthodox. So my first thing would be to encourage someone, if you're interested in Eastern things, explore the Eastern Catholic churches, because substantially speaking, it's the same tradition. Without the need to break communion with the Catholic Church. So that's the first thing. Oftentimes, you find the situation, the grass seems to be greener on the other side, and I think this is one where this happens. There's a need to be aware of what you're leaving behind before you sort of jump ship, which, part of it is the unity of belief that we have in the Catholic world. So essentially, there are some things that would attract someone to Orthodoxy. Like I said, most of those exist in the Eastern Catholic world. And, you have those different, another thing in the Orthodox world is you tend to get doctrinal vacillations, and even vacillations in practice from place to place. There isn't necessarily a unified practice. You might have a monastic setting that's very strict with a fast, and we won't give you communion if you didn't fast from cheese the night before. And then another place where it may be more lax or a different practice, and practices that don't line up. So there's a lack, I would say, as well on the doctrinal level of a kind of magisterial reflectiveness. So often what you'll find when you get into the nuts and bolts of how an Orthodox bishop might address a moral issue, very often they may be referencing what the Catholic Church is teaching, with the understanding that there was a lot of thought and discernment into all the factors. So certain issues where I've seen that, where it actually will be sort of copying what the Catholics are saying. So that's something to take into consideration. Also, I guess there are three areas ultimately. The area of doctrine, where we are one as Catholics, the area of prayer in terms of the liturgy, where we have a rich tradition, but we're in communion with each other. And then authority, where again, you have different bishops, but there is a communion. There's one church that's there. So it's easy to abandon ship in stormy conditions when something appears to be more peaceful elsewhere. But the way I would put it is the Catholic Church is the one equipped ultimately to weather the storm. So be cautious in jumping ship like that.
Father, this might be kind of an interesting question, but I'm sure you have great perspective on this. I know Catholics, Roman Catholics, who maybe some of them, and I actually know some who very much were taken aback, scandalized by some of the things that happened during COVID, or maybe banal liturgy growing up, and they've moved to Eastern Catholicism. They found really great refuge in divine liturgy. I think that's very beautiful, even if they haven't officially transferred rites, which I know is like a thing that you would have to technically do sometimes. But at the same time, too, how much of this movement is just a little bit of, how do I say this politely? Like LARPing, if you will, it's kind of like putting on the Eastern sort of practices without actually having to take to heart, because it's obviously like their sister rites. There's great beauty with all the 24 churches, but obviously, I love the divine liturgy. I'm very graced when I've been to them, and I love being a Roman Catholic. And I think that you can still be a Roman Catholic and still have great appreciation for the East and vice versa, obviously.
Very, very good point. I remember when the bishop ordained me a deacon, he said, remember, we're not Roman Catholics in Eastern vestments. There's a whole approach to everything that we do liturgically, spiritually, which has a certain integrity to it, which doesn't contradict the West. It's complementary, but at the same time, there's an integrity to it. And I kind of come across that. You'll visit certain places that may be, very staunchly Roman Catholic, but then there'll be icons everywhere. And that's fine. Icons are beautiful. It's beautiful that they're being used. But oftentimes that will be accompanied by a lack of understanding of how the icon fits into the larger spiritual tradition. And it can be, in a sense, kind of out of context. So you can get sort of I don't want to say a syncretism, but you can get maybe a superficial adherence to Eastern practice without a deeper commitment, which requires wrestling with certain doctrinal issues. It's easy coming from an Eastern or Western tradition to have I don't want to say like a one-dimensional approach, but it's easy to have an approach that it seems to be very black and white in a lot of ways, and there are ways that things are approached differently, and grappling with those. And like I said, they don't contradict each other, but it does take prayer and discernment and an understanding as to what it means to be in communion, even when you articulate things differently. And that can be years of really bringing things to prayer and humility and patience. It's fruitful, but at the same time, it's if it's just an outlet for, well, I've got a liturgical polemic happening in my tradition, so this is an outlet. I mean, some people are brought in through the liturgy, of course, but if it's more as sort of a separatism than it is an actual embracing of the tradition, then it's incomplete. And very often those sorts of changes don't last. People will revert back or whatever.